letter from Kim Jong-un has been sent to the White House calling for another summit between the two leaders of the two sides to continue the efforts in the peace process.
The primary purpose of the letter was to request and look to schedule another meeting with the president.
Is the second TrumpKim meeting likely to happen this year? Now a second summit is in sight. Considering the current political undercurrents in the White House and that midterm elections are ahead, will noises emerge again inside the U.S. government this time around? Leaders from both sides of the Korean Peninsula are surely to talk again, which will be the third time this year on the 18th of this month in Pyongyang. Will there be anything new that Kim Jong-un and Moon Jae-in will bring to the table next week? So far, both the U.S. and the DPRK have made friendly gestures and showed a willingness to end the dilemma over the Korean Peninsula. What's China's role in the whole process? And what can be expected from Beijing for the peace talks?
Through an ongoing set of midterm elections and amid a New York Times opt by an anonymous writer claiming to be part of a secretive group trying to steer President Trump, a letter from the DPRK's Kim Jong-un has arrived at the White House to raise Donald Trump's spirits. But will the second meeting happen considering the efforts to scuttle the first one? Has enough progress been made from both the U.S. and the DPRK for such a meeting to be justifiable? And if so, could it feasibly occur at the White House? To discuss these issues and more, I'm happy to be joined in the studio by Mr. Xu Qingduo, a senior fellow with the Pentagon Institution, Mr. Harvey Zoden, a senior research fellow with the Center for China and Globalization. We'll also be joined from Boston by Professor Sang-Yun Lee from the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy and Tufts University. That is our topic. This is Dialogue. I'm Li Qiuyuan. All right, so let's talk about this. Let me start with you, Mr. Zoden. A letter from Pyongyang has found its way to the White House seeking for another meeting. But can a second meeting really happen? This is not locked in yet. What do you think?
I think there's a good chance it will happen because the first meeting gave both the President Trump and Chairman a chance to show off and to raise their standards, especially Chairman Kim. So it's no surprise to me, really, that the invitation or initiation is coming from North Korea. Kim did very, very well in the first meeting, and I was thinking about it earlier today, and it reminded me of an episode of Apprentice, but with a twist. The twist being that the apprentice in that case was Donald Trump, and Kim was the businessman, the teacher, the professor.
Truth is, a number of U.S. officials, have been skeptical about negotiating with Trump. John Bolton, James Mattis, even Pompeo to some extent. Would you agree that this meeting will go ahead as scheduled?
I largely agree that I think the second meeting will go ahead sometime probably later this month or even next month over there because both sides have this enthusiasm, and the two leaders in particular, like Donald Trump, has shown this enthusiasm to meet Kim again to push forward, to break this frustration over there. There's a deadlock right now, and so we are not seeing progress or expected progress between the two countries in discussion. So probably it needs the involvement, the personal involvement of the two leaders to break ground. But as you said, some of the advisors, Secretary of State and like Advisor John Bolton, they are very, very, let's say, hardline, conservative. They have a strong disbelief or distrust in North Korea. That would be, I would say, yes, an issue. We will see.
Now, White House spokeswoman Sarah Sanders said the letter was, quote, warm and positive and showed commitment to denuclearization. I mean, this seems to be in stark contrast to the abruptly canceled trip by Mike Pompeo just last month. What do you think happened in the lead up to this?
Well, first of all, words are words and actions are actions. So coming out of the first meeting, very little came out of it except theatrics. So I suspect that the North Koreans would like to get something moving. I don't have any factual basis to say this, and the time is short because it will happen next week in the UN General Assembly. But a more perfect place to meet, more than the White House, since no progress has been made yet, is for Kim to address the world body, General Assembly. So I think maybe there could be a surprise next week.
Mr. Xu, what would you say? What's your assessment? Has Pyongyang made, enough efforts to denuclearize?
I disagree with Harvey to a certain degree. Like here, look, I mean, North Korea has done for the suspension of the U.S. military drills in the Korean Peninsula, and what they have done is this dismantling of a nuclear site, and also the repatriation of U.S. soldiers' remains to Washington. And I think that has shown at least a goodwill from North Korean side. They say, hey, we are creating this necessary environment for the two countries to move ahead for further talks.
Would you like
but
to
for the U.S.,
yeah, sure.
I mean, the U.S., you can say high concessions made by the U.S. It's easy to get reversed. It's a verbal, basically, commitment. Like, oh, we have suspended the military drill for a while, and then you can resume it easily, right?
I think that it was all window dressing. So if you look at that parade recently, Kim is getting so many points for not showing his most serious weapons. He disabled one of his tunnels by shutting it down and stuff. But in terms of complete, verifiable, irreversible denuclearization, zilch, zero has happened.
The thing is, like, when we talk about denuclearization in the Korean Peninsula, for the U.S., their focus is on the North Korean side. Okay, CVID, so-called, right? Complete, verifiable, irreversible destruction of nuclear weapons. But for North Korea, it's about the Korean Peninsula, not only about North Korea, but also by the U.S., like, nuclear-capable military assets in the Korean Peninsula, and also the so-called nuclear umbrella protection to the South Korean side. For North Korea, if we do so-called denuclearization here, we should do it at the same time.
Yeah, that's the thing. The U.S. want denuclearization in the DPRK, but the terms on the agreement was denuclearization of the entire peninsula here.
That's right.
Their understanding about what should happen first is also different. There seems to be confusion around, what should be the first step. The U.S. want the DPRK to destroy as weapons, but the Pyongyang want U.S. to, deliver on a peace declaration on the Korean War to end hostility. Do you think that they could work something out this time if that meeting does happen?
Well, look, I think that I just have a feeling that the reason that Kim walked around Singapore the night before the summit was that he wanted to show people what could happen if, in the words of John Lennon's song, you gave peace a chance. So instead of the West being this decadent country or an area of many countries, it's an opportunity for this hermit kingdom to enter the community of nations. So I actually think that unlike Kim's father or grandfather, that there's a real chance here to give peace a chance. So I think that there's a desire. On the other hand, about the step-by-step denuclearization, we've been there for years and years, and both sides have disagreed on it so far, and it's not going to be easy, but it's not impossible.
I agree. It's not impossible, but of course, I mean, the course towards that goal is not that smooth, obviously, because the two sides they can't even agree on the definition of denuclearization in the Korean Peninsula. And right now, is really about who will take the first step and which first step. For the North Korean, the priority is really about let's declare an official end of the Korean War, and then that will create the ground for peace and stability in this peninsula. But for the U.S. side, at least for the President Trump's advisors in particular, all they are looking at whether there are substantial steps taken by North Korean side to disarm all those nuclear weapons, nuclear facilities over there. So they are looking for progress or concessions to be made by North Korean side. But North Korea are looking at, hey, what about let's finish the war officially, and then we'll do something more about that, and maybe the dismantling of all those nuclear facilities. And for the South Korean side, you would see they are kind of like in line with North Korean idea. Let's have, say war is finished. We are going to work toward peace. What about that? Of course, it's up to the two leaders, Donald Trump, the President of the United States. He's very powerful, and he can use his, personal power here to press ahead to make real progress.
What are the chances that they can, find some middle ground here?
I think that there's a desire to do so, especially from the North Koreans. The North Korean government hasn't always been so positive, but they seem very positive today. I think there's some chance of slowly making some middle ground. So I'm cautiously optimistic. And that's why I think meeting again, even if there may not be many deliverables from it, is a good idea.
That's why the U.S. announcement coming out this time has raised so many hopes that a leader-to-leader summit could really achieve something that lower-level negotiations weren't able to achieve, which is to provide a clear roadmap to denuclearization, for Pyongyang to abandon its nuclear weapon. But can they do that? Provide a clear roadmap?
It could be. It's as I said, it's up to the two leaders, Mr. Kim and Mr. Trump over there. That's usually, of course, tough decisions. They are to be made by the leaders themselves, right? And including the priority. What's the next step? What's the priority for both sides for the negotiation to continue over there? I mean, some people would say the problems are with Donald Trump's advisors, because they are obviously, I'm not sure they are ready to say, hey, let's announce this official end of a war, and then we will talk about peace, and then we will talk about disarming the nuclear facilities over there. Their priority is different. But as you mentioned, what about a possible compromise? I think that's still possible. What about previously we have a freeze for freeze, basically, a suspension of a nuclear test, a missile test, and then there's a suspension of a military exercise on the U.S. side. And then what about the next step? We also do it like in the tandem, fashion. Like U.S. side will do something, and then North Korean side will also provide some concessions, so we can push forward the negotiation.
The dual suspension was proposed by Beijing. What do you think the roadmap should look like or could look like?
Well, I think it's difficult to figure it out, but I think at first there needs to be some small steps at confidence building. I think it's going to be very difficult for North Korea to agree to give up all their nuclear weapons, if they ever do that, until the last moment. And personally, I don't think they'll ever give up all of them, because they think back to the example of Muammar Gaddafi, and John Bolton has talked about the Libya Gaddafi model of Gaddafi being butchered in some sewer after agreeing to give up his nuclear weapons. So I think North Korea has a right to be concerned. So I think slowly, decommissioning some weapons, decommissioning some delivery systems, this is a good start. And has to happen, as Shinhua said, on both sides.
And we're now joined from Boston by Professor Sang-Yoon Lee. Great to have you with us, Professor Lee. Now, we're talking about a possible second Trump-Kim summit. What do you think of this? Has enough progress been made from both the U.S. side and the DPRK side for a second meeting to be justifiable?
Well, I think it's going to happen because both sides seek a follow-up summit meeting to the Singapore meeting in June. Many people say North Korea is unpredictable, but I think North Korea is approximately predictable after that banner ballistic year in 2017, when North Korea fired off 3 unprecedented ICBMs and conducted a hydrogen bomb test. 2018 was the year to tone things down and to try to engage the world, and in particular the Trump administration. So when Donald Trump impulsively agreed to Kim Jong-un's proposition for a meeting back in March, I think Kim had a plan, Trump not so much. This is the way that North Korea continues the negotiation process, dragging things out as much as possible, and in the meantime gain basic concessions like the suspension of the combined military drills between the U.S. and South Korea, getting all UN member states to loosen up on enforcement of sanctions. So I think North Korea really wants to really further ensnare Trump into a drawn-out negotiation process, which will be very helpful for Kim in buying more time and money with which to do what he really seeks, which is to increase his military capabilities.
And what do you expect coming out from that summit if that meeting does happen? A clear roadmap to denuclearization, is that possible?
Well, North Korea can sign off on agreements and present roadmaps and so forth. We've seen this before, but whether North Korea abides by those agreements is an entirely different matter. I think Kim Jong-un will lean on President Trump to agree to some kind of a declaration of the end of the Korean War, also a peace treaty and so on. And I think there's a good chance that Kim will be able to wrest away those concessions because the Trump administration is not nearly as keen on maintaining the alliance with South Korea or even with Japan as his predecessors. And I think the Trump administration would view perhaps even the withdrawal of some soldiers from South Korea as a tactical advantage vis-a-vis North Korea and South Korea. So I think Kim is sitting pretty comfortably right now, and I would not be surprised if Kim Jong-un visited the United States, the White House, or New York City, and held a second summit with Trump in the next few weeks.
Oh, wow. Now, South Korean President Moon Jae-in said this after the White House received a letter from Kim. He said bold decisions should be taken by both parties. What do you think he's referring to, the bold decisions?
Well, Moon Jae-in has been trying very hard to persuade the Trump administration to be more flexible, open-minded, and make more concessions to North Korea, and really lift sanctions against North Korea, allowing South Korea to resume the kind of very generous engagement policy that we saw between 1998 and 2008, when South Korea poured into the North Korean regime's coffers about $900 million a year. So whether that kind of engagement really leads to denuclearization and reform and opening, that remains to be seen, but that's what South Korea seeks. And I think Moon Jae-in is really trying to lean on the Trump administration to return to negotiations and be willing to make more and more concessions to the North.
And Mr. Chu here in the Beijing studio, how do you think all of this is being received by observers across the Atlantic, Asia?
Well, I think people are looking at that. For the first summit, there's a lot of criticism within the U.S., even around the world. But look, I mean, that's a bold decision made by President Trump, basically breaking all the traditions, basically not to meet with the Kim himself, his father and his grandfather over there. So that's a breakthrough, and we are seeing at least some chances of success, if not complete denuclearization of nuclear weapons in the Korean Peninsula. But I mean, that's a diplomacy, right? Diplomatic efforts should never be abandoned. You should, as long as there's a chance, you should jump on at that and continue getting involved with the other side to see. Of course, for North Korea, their demand is right now economic development. So for that, they needed to, the U.S. side, UN, to lift all the economic sanctions, and also they need a better environment to focus on their economic development. So they need a détente. They need a good relationship with the United States. But I think as long as the security is guaranteed from the U.S. side, so there might be a real chance for the North Koreans to give up their nuclear weapons.
And how will Beijing react to this? Was it coordinated?
Yeah, Beijing has made it open that they welcome the possible second meeting between the two leaders because negotiation and talks between the two sides are always conducive from Beijing's point of view to peace and stability in this region, because Beijing and the U.S. basically share the same goal. There should not nuclear weapons because it is a destabilizing factor in this region.
What do you think of all of this? How are observers receiving it, considering all the media reactions?
Well, I think talking is better than not talking, so I think it's a good idea. I think what we're missing so far, though, is there's a lot in it for Trump immediately, because Trump's come off a couple really bad weeks in domestic politics with the Bob Woodward's book and so on. And so he needs a couple deliverable tweets that he can say, I did this, I exercised leadership. Let's face it, the congressional elections are coming up quite soon. So I think it's in Trump's interest to do everything he can to look like there's progress here.
Yeah, probably even more at his interest now, as the book is picturing the White House as a dysfunctional one. Professor Lee, let me bring you into the discussion here. Now, South Korean President Moon Jae-in is going to meet Kim Jong-un next week between 18th to 20th. They are going to have denuclearization talks. What can we expect from that summit?
Well, more inter-Korean projects. Next year, 2019, will mark the 100th anniversary of the South Korean Declaration of Independence, a peaceful protest movement on March 1st, 1919. It will mark the 100th anniversary of the May 4th movement in China. It will mark the 100th anniversary of the establishment of a Korean provisional government in Shanghai in April 1919. And what that means is there will be an incentive for the North and the South to come together, putting on various commemorative events vis-a-vis Japan. So I think there's a dynamic there that favors South Korea and North Korea in further seeking reconciliation. And I think we'll see from the summit coming up next week, Moon Jae-in and Kim Jong-un show a lot of camaraderie and a resolve to continue to improve inter-Korean ties. Now, whether that leads to Kim Jong-un really opening up his economy or become more willing to give up his nuclear weapons remains to be seen. But when Kim visits China again, shall we say, as his father did back in 2001, after having met with the South Korean president, after having sent an envoy to Bill Clinton, inviting President Clinton to North Korea, after having met with Putin, all in 2000, Kim Jong-il visited Shanghai, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Zhuhai, all these special economic zones, imitating Deng Xiaoping, and all the world's media and North Korea watchers grew very optimistic that this marked the arrival of a Korean Deng Xiaoping, a real reformer. So I think the dynamics in place really favor Kim Jong-un. He's the driver, he's running the show, and whether this leads to any kind of real long-term positive development remains to be seen.
Yeah, and on the matter of Korean reunification, Professor Lee, Moon Jae-in is presenting phased steps with Pyongyang, and in the just past military parade, the DPRK made some efforts to communicate Korean unification as long-term goal. Is this sort of symbiosis of some sort a medium-term, obtainable objective?
Well, since the end of the Korean War in 1953, when the shooting stopped in 1953, over the past 65 years, there has been no war in the Korean Peninsula, a shaky peace, but real de facto peace. Whereas if you look at the 60-year period leading up to the outbreak of the war in 1950, I count 5 major wars. What that means is the past 65 years has been a period of relative peace and tremendous growth, especially for South Korea. So the two Korean states, I envision the two Korean states coexisting without shooting at each other on a major scale for the foreseeable future. But when North Korea talks about Korean unification, achieving unification by the Korean people ourselves exclusively, what North Korea really means is evicting the U.S. troops from the South, downgrading U.S. support for South Korea, political military support for the South, and really having its way with South Korea. So there is a slightly somber message hidden in North Korea's slogans of Korean reunification, unification of the fatherland by the Korean people themselves.
I saw you nodding your head, Mr. Zoden. Give us your thoughts on the prospect of Korean unification.
Yeah, well, I think there are a couple legal issues here. So if we come to a peace treaty, the law, as I understand it, the international law is there's going to be one Korea. So to do a variance from that, then we'll have to have two Koreas. This is going to be a knotty issue. And the professor's exactly right. The North Koreans, and the South Koreans for that matter, both see a united Korea, but with each side leading it. So that's very difficult to put together and to square.
Mr. Xu, you want to build on that?
I would say that it takes time, and of course you see there's a lot of disparity. For South Korea, it's almost like a developed country economically, and for North Korea, it's lagging far behind. But when it comes to the military power, North Korea is more powerful than South Korea. So there's a lot of imbalance between the two countries right now. If they want to achieve the ultimate unification, it simply takes time for them to, I would say, a lot of communication and exchanges, not only on the official level, but also, people-to-people level, investment and trade, gradually. Maybe there's an organic way.
Yeah. Professor Lee, can the South feasibly pursue Korean integration outside U.S. wishes?
It will be hard, but that's what North Korea has sought ever since the early 1970s, when North Korea has insisted on a peace treaty with the United States. A peace treaty sounds wonderful, but if there is no political will between two adversaries to really protect the peace, it can fall apart. We've seen non-aggression pacts and peace treaties in the past really serve its role as a historical canard. So what North Korea seeks is to become a credible threat to the U.S. mainland. How does North Korea achieve that? Develop nuclear weapons that can be that can be mounted on an ICBM and with which North Korea can threaten to nuke a major U.S. city. What happens then? Well, maybe the U.S. then will be more amenable to concluding a peace treaty or even withdrawing U.S. troops from the South. And that means the balance of political power in the peninsula would swing in North Korea's favor. Already North Korea is able to censor South Korea and bully South Korea at will. So in terms of military power, yes, North Korea is superior to the South, but when you consider all other indices of measuring state power, like economic power, soft power, culture, political freedom, size of one's population, and so forth, North Korea far lags behind the South. And the point that I'm trying to make here is that the sheer existence of South Korea implicitly is a long-term existential threat to the Kim regime. When South Korea is a magnet to the North Korean people, you have a problem if you are the Kim regime. So I think the regime has a long-term plan, and I think it's been making heady progress over the past 4 or 5 years.
All right, let's leave it there. Thank you very much, Professor Soon-Yoon Lee, joining us live from Boston, and here in the Beijing studio, Mr. Zoden and Mr. Shishindo. Thank you very much for sharing your insights. And that does it for this edition of Dialogue. Thank you for your company. Bye for now.